Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking the incredible and honestly deeply complex journey of Khan Sir. We're going to trace his path from some very modest roots in Uttar Pradesh all the way to becoming a literal national movement in Indian education. You know, this really isn't just a story about a guy standing in front of a whiteboard. It's a masterclass in communication. It's a deep dive into the massive business of modern digital education. And, perhaps most importantly, it's a stark look at exactly what happens when immense influence collides head-on with national scrutiny.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering his early struggles, the Patna phenomenon, the digital education revolution, his broader social impact, the intense crises of 2022 and 2026, and finally, his lasting legacy. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Struggle Before Fame. From Deoria to Allahabad.
To really understand the man, you have to look at where he started. Born in Deoria, Uttar Pradesh, he came from a family with very modest means. And I mean the kind of background where absolutely every single expense has to be carefully calculated. So when he moved to Allahabad for his higher education, he wasn't just going to college, he was stepping into an absolute pressure cooker. Picture tens of thousands of young adults all crammed into these tiny rooms, desperately chasing a tiny fraction of available government jobs. He was right there in the trenches with them, facing severe financial constraints and the crushing psychological weight of exam failures. These weren't just brief little setbacks. No, these were defining life lessons. He learned exactly what a confused, financially stressed student feels like when the system just seems totally rigged against them, mostly because he was living it himself.
And out of those early struggles emerged a crystal-clear philosophy. He realized pretty quickly that the biggest barrier for these students wasn't a lack of intelligence. Not at all. The real barrier was this deeply entrenched systemic inequality. Education in India had become highly commercialized, heavily favoring the wealthy and the English-speaking elite. Think about it. If you came from a village and only spoke Hindi, traditional coaching centers practically made you feel like you didn't belong. The academic language was super intimidating, and the fees? Astronomical. So his core belief crystallized into this powerful counter-narrative. Education is a pathway to social mobility that absolutely must depend purely on hard work and understanding, completely independent of how much money is in your pocket or how fluent your English happens to be. Section 2. Building the Patna phenomenon. Disrupting the coaching industry.
So, when he eventually entered the coaching world in Patna, which by the way is a massive hub for competitive exams, there was a stark duality in how students were being taught. On one hand, traditional centers focused on incredibly expensive, really dry syllabus delivery. They used this complex academic jargon that actively alienated rural students. Well, Khan Sir completely disrupted that entire model. He offered highly affordable classes, stripped away all the fancy jargon, and leaned heavily into simple, natural language and a lot of humor. He didn't just stand there delivering cold facts. He ensured actual long-term retention through storytelling. Like, if he was explaining a highly complex international geopolitical conflict, he wouldn't use stiff academic terms. Instead, he'd compare the countries to two bickering neighbors arguing over a property line. It instantly made the concept relatable, funny, and totally unforgettable.
And because he spoke the authentic, everyday language of the common people, his physical classes in Patna just exploded. We are not talking about a modest little increase in enrollment here. We're talking about massive, packed-to-the-brim classrooms driven by pure organic word of mouth. He built the Controversies Research Center based on these exact elements. His students were experiencing a fundamental psychological shift, really. They went from absolutely dreading the memorization of dense historical facts to actually enjoying the learning process. The energy in the room was just infectious. He basically proved that you don't need a massive corporate marketing budget or slick, expensive advertisements if you can just make intimidating subjects completely understandable, highly accessible, and deeply engaging.
Section 3. The Digital Education Revolution. Reaching the Millions. Now, the internet fundamentally changed his trajectory, taking him from a local Patna legend into a nationwide icon reaching millions. The COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns were the undeniable catalysts here. When physical coaching centers slammed their doors shut, millions of rural and small-town students were suddenly isolated, entirely cut off from educational resources. Khan Sir stepped right into that massive void. His digital reach skyrocketed because his smartphone-accessible videos perfectly served this completely underserved population. Students who previously had zero financial or geographic access to top-tier coaching could suddenly learn from him for free or just for pennies. His viral clips spread like wildfire because of their simplicity and humor, turning complex topics into highly digestible stories for anyone with a cheap smartphone and a basic data connection.
But here is the really fascinating part. As he scaled his app and built this massive organizational structure to handle the influx of millions of students, he rigidly maintained his core philosophy. Honestly, this is arguably his most defining business decision. Despite the immense digital scale and the obvious, glaring opportunity to maximize his profits, he completely resisted the temptation to commercialize his success. He kept the courses extremely affordable, often charging just a few hundred rupees for months of comprehensive preparation. He didn't suddenly pivot to targeting urban, wealthy students, and he didn't introduce premium subscription models. He stayed totally true to the demographic that made him, the rural aspirant who just needed a fair shot.
Section 4. Influence, Social Impact, and the Human Side. A symbol for rural India.
As his audience ballooned into the millions, his role fundamentally shifted well beyond just getting through a syllabus. He evolved from a highly effective lecturer into a mentor and really a powerful symbol of hope for marginalized students across the entire country. His social initiatives expanded significantly too. He facilitated quiet fee concessions for struggling students who couldn't even afford those nominal app charges. He launched broader affordable healthcare initiatives, recognizing a very basic truth: a sick student simply cannot study effectively. To his massive community, he wasn't just an education business owner anymore. He became a genuine champion for rural India. He understood their deep anxieties about unemployment and family expectations, providing the kind of deep, motivational, and emotional support that standard test prep textbooks literally never offer.
Section 5. Scrutiny and Controversies. The 2022 and 2026 Crises.
But listen, massive influence always attracts massive scrutiny. It's inevitable. And the 2022 railway recruitment protests were the first major flashpoint for this. For a bit of context here, hundreds of thousands of students took to the streets protesting what they alleged were massive discrepancies and unfair changes in the Railway Recruitment Board exam results, which is a huge, critical avenue for government employment. When that unrest really boiled over, an FIR was filed against Consur and several others. Public perception split clearly, right down the middle. Supporters passionately felt he was simply defending students and voicing their genuine, deeply held grievances against a flawed system. Critics, however, took a very different stance. They argued that his massive reach required much stricter caution, maintaining that highly influential educators have a profound responsibility to ensure student frustration doesn't escalate into public unrest and property damage.
Now, if you thought that was intense, the 2026 crisis escalated even more rapidly. It kicked off in June with localized reports of vandalism and a confrontation right outside his coaching institute. And from there, it snowballed instantly. Police registered an FIR that explicitly named him, which prompted his legal team to rapidly seek anticipatory bail just to protect his liberty while the actual facts were being sorted out. The sheer anxiety surrounding an anticipatory bail plea for a national figure of his size is immense. Almost overnight, this localized incident in Patna transformed into a full-blown national legal and media storm, dominating news cycles and lighting up social media feeds across the entire country.
And once again, the battle for public perception split sharply. We have to remember, the business of education in India is a multi-million-dollar, fiercely competitive industry. Because of this, his supporters cited intense coaching industry rivalries, arguing he was being unfairly implicated and targeted by competitors who were threatened by his massive influence and the incredible goodwill he held with students. Critics, on the other hand, demanded absolute accountability. Their view was strictly that no one, regardless of their fame, their massive subscriber count, or their philanthropic background, is above the law. They argued that thorough investigations into the vandalism and unrest had to proceed impartially, without any special treatment whatsoever.
This whole situation perfectly highlights the modern digital reality we live in today. It's a real paradox. While the courts, the police, and the legal systems slowly and methodically process evidence, gather statements, and handle those anticipatory bail hearings, the trial of public opinion happens in an absolute instant. Narratives form in a complete vacuum, aggressively amplified by social media algorithms that are specifically designed to reward outrage and emotion over established facts. Consur found himself caught right in the dead center of this intense, high-stakes friction between the slow, procedural reality of the law and the instantaneous, often entirely unforgiving nature of digital judgment.
Section 6. Resilience and Lasting Legacy. Surviving the Storm.
Now, despite the immense compounding pressure of these dual crises, the phenomenon didn't collapse. Instead of retreating or completely disappearing from the public eye, which, let's be honest, happens to so many public figures in the midst of a scandal, he leaned heavily into his core purpose. He just kept teaching his classes.
He relied on a massive, deep reserve of community trust that he had painstakingly built up over a decade. His students didn't abandon him, and that's because their relationship was built on genuine learning and mentorship, not just some fleeting online popularity. He proved that when you maintain a laser focus on your core educational mission, that earned goodwill acts as an incredibly powerful, resilient shield during severe reputational crises.
Ultimately, his legacy transcends those individual controversies. He fundamentally revolutionized competitive exam preparation in India. Think back to his own early struggles in Allahabad. He took that pain and drove the democratization of learning, proving once and for all that world-class education doesn't need to be locked behind expensive coaching center doors. He sparked a true language revolution by making incredibly high-level concepts accessible in natural Hindi, totally destroying the barrier of English elitism. He shifted student expectations, transforming the role of a teacher from a dry lecturer just reading a syllabus into a deeply invested mentor. And most importantly, he proved that massive nationwide educational influence can be built far outside the traditional elite metropolitan centers, directly from the heart of Bihar.
Which brings us to a final, pretty massive question to ponder. As digital platforms continue to allow teachers to reach millions and become cultural icons overnight, what is the true price of that extreme online influence? How do we balance the immense, undeniable good of accessible education with the heavy responsibilities and intense scrutiny that inevitably come with it? It's a question the future of digital education is absolutely going to have to answer. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning and keep learning.